Hi, everyone. Good morning, I guess, to everyone in the US listening right now. Good afternoon to everyone here with me in Europe, and good evening, I guess, to everyone in Asia. My name is Max. I'm one of the managing partners from One Capital. And today I would love to talk to you guys about different methods of funding and hopefully also give you guys a little bit of an idea of how to determine what the right one is for you, right? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of different options out there. But before we dive into all of this, and to save everyone a little bit of time today as well, it's very important for me that we have the right audience here today. So before we dive into the different methods, we want to discuss, or I would like to discuss a little bit more with you, publishing versus self-publishing, because I think this talk is more tailored towards people that really want to follow a path of a self-publishing route. And it's important for me that we can have a good conversation about this going. If you are uncertain which route to take, we will take a little bit of time at the beginning to kind of like address exactly self-publishing, publishing, before we dive into the different methods of funding that are out there. I've also seen that there's quite a lot of like conversations and talks about Kickstarter projects and crowdfunding. That's something I'm not going to address on purpose today, because I think we have fantastic speakers at this event that are going to cover this kind of method of financing your operations or any perspectives that you're looking to do. Maybe a little bit about myself, just very quickly, in a nutshell, at least I try to do so. My name is Max. I'm currently sitting here in the north of Germany in Hamburg, which is famous for its harbor and its red light district, I would say, but we are also a very strong city in Europe when it comes to actually gaming. So we have a strong hub here. But I'm originally based, or normally based, in London. Given with everything that's going on in this world right now, we just went to the other office in Germany and still stuck. But I guess with the perks of being an online event, it doesn't really matter that much. I come from a finance background. I started with investment banking, then took a very strong turn towards more like the advertising marketing route. I've built offices in New York and London for larger agency groups. I've launched and built an own agency that has now over 4 offices globally in Europe and in Asia, which is still operating, where I just became a board member now in order to focus myself full-time on One Capital, which is a user acquisition fund. We'll talk and address that as well a little bit today. You don't have to take notes. You don't have to sit there and write your hands, write as much as possible. You are going to receive a deck, because I'm not presenting anything today. I wanted to focus exactly on addressing you guys. You don't have to take notes. You're going to receive a deck that kind of summarizes key points and gives you a little bit of a write-up in terms of everything that we've been going through today. And yeah, please feel free to ask any questions. I hope I'll be made aware of them, and I'm looking forward to those. Now, so first things first, publisher or self-publishing. I wanted to do a little bit of an excursus into that direction before we dive into the actual matter of today's talk, right? Now, we all are probably aware of the advantages that a publisher can have, right? I mean, it's almost like a full service house that can give you access to QA testing, to localization, obviously to money, which is kind of the key factor here, which then allows you to do advertising, and well, historically speaking, a little bit more also for development, but that has changed in my opinion in the recent years, that it's more focused on titles that already are about to be launched or that are ready to launch, and that the actual funding and financing comes more like for the global launches or the local launches and so on, right? When it comes to self-publishing, it's kind of like a startup, right? You have to come up with some funds, you have to pay rent. It's all a little bit scary. It's a very different nature itself. So my point here is that when trying to make a decision between what route to choose, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to look at pros and cons here. I mean, of course, you're going to can put those down and see what makes sense the most for you. But I think it all boils down to the very essential question or fundamental question of what is your mindset, right? Compare this maybe to, would you rather go and work for someone or build your own company? Right. So I think the very first step in terms of what am I going to do with my title before I even think about different financing options is kind of discussing that fundamental question of self-publishing versus publishing. And I don't want to say one is good and bad. It all has perks and downsides, right? It's really just about like who you are as a person and what you are willing to do for it, right? So when you, for example, compare it to like, an everyday job, if you work for someone, let's say that's the publisher route, you get a monthly income, you get your royalties, you have like a little bit of security, stability, which gives you time, for example, to then focus on other projects again. It gives you time to focus on maybe like another hobby and so on. You give away responsibility, and someone else has to take care of that. And in exchange, you also have to give away ownership, right? So obviously you give away an IP, but you get a lot of upside for it. Now, going the other route, self-publishing as a venture itself, it obviously can be a bit scary because you're going into uncharted waters. Maybe you don't know what's going to happen, how to fund the game, and so on. And that's what we're going to discuss a little bit more today, right? So I think if you're undecided, still stay in the talk. I would love that, obviously. But keep in mind, we can do pro and con lists, but it's about your mindset and the kind of character trait that you have, and that will help you, I think, to decide exactly that fundamental question, right? Going a step further now in exactly the different types and why we are here today, right? We want to discuss 4 different types of funding, which is venture capital, banks. Very similar to banks, the idea of using credit cards and user acquisition funds. Well, first of all, I hope I'm a bit biased, obviously, but I'm trying to keep it as Swiss as possible. Let's put it like this. But we obviously also see increase in those companies popping up. You might already have talked to a few at other events or heard about them. So I think they starting to have more and more have their absolute right to be here. As mentioned before, crowdfunding, Kickstarter projects, and so on, because that's covered in a lot of other talks this week. I'm going to leave this one out. We are going to start comparing them, obviously, but again, because this is so situation based, and I'm not sure in front of who I'm sitting right now today, if you have an app or it's a PC and console title, is it maybe like something that goes into the AAA direction, or is it very, very, very indie that you're just like doing right now? Everything can be suited to different purposes. So we're trying to keep a broad, unbiased look at everything. Starting off with the I think the old school classical version of it, talking about banks, right? I mean, banks are the most straightforward solution because I think they're omnipresent. They obviously are having quite good interest rates in a lot of countries at the moment. So we're trying to keep the geographical point in mind that we have probably audiences from Europe and from the US and maybe Asia today here. But in most geolocations, we see very good interest rates. So banks can be quite attractive because what you can do is you can both obviously get a loan as an individual or as a company, which kind of gives you a little bit of flexibility here in the way of how you want to structure that. Now, the downside to this, and this is something that a lot of people tend to forget, getting a loan is a form of debt, right? So we're talking about debt funding here. And when we talk about debt funding, there's a liability attached to it, right? And we have to obviously keep in mind that, should a game not perform in a certain period or in a certain month, the bank still is going to ask for their returns, right? So one thing that is really important here to keep in mind is if the economy, for example, is going in a direction that is not helping your game, so there's external factors or there's internal factors, so that the game is not monetizing well, for example, no matter what happens, you're kind of stuck with whatever you have signed up on. So it gives you a little bit of a level of inflexibility. On the other hand, it's very approachable, right? So when we're looking at banks, I think it's important to keep in mind for who this might be a good option. In what we've seen in the companies that we've talked to in the past, banks certainly make sense for companies that have been out there for a little bit longer, right? Because when you have a bank account, the purpose of banking with the bank is not just having a bank account, but building a relationship, right? And if you are about to launch a new company, and the first thing that you have to do is basically go into a debt relationship with the bank, that can obviously be leading to a tricky or difficult situation. So our recommendation in that sense is to probably, if you are in a very, very early stage, to maybe look for alternative sources at the very beginning, rather than going into a relationship that can give you little flexibility at a period where a lot of uncertainty obviously is there, right? The other point that I would like to point out, I don't know if this applies to every country, but something that I've seen a lot here in Central Europe is when you go to banks, is their perception of the industry itself, which is BS in my opinion, because obviously we are talking about an industry that is worth billions, that is ultra professional. But when we talk to banks in the past, and clients of ours talk to banks, in some cases, and this is no joke, they for them, gambling and gaming, for example, is the same thing. Going through KYC, so know your own customer processes, for example, and so on, becomes ridiculously difficult just because the understanding of what gaming actually is not correct, right? So, I mean, I can't speak for every geolocation, obviously, on this, but it's just something, it's a word of warning here that we've seen quite a lot, that people stumbled across, that when they come and speak to, your typical bank teller woman or man that basically is not trying to give you a loan, once you talk to them about click-through rates, how well they do, how good the cost per install is, the lifetime value, that's just gibberish to them. That doesn't help to get to the goal. So again, it's not going to be something that is applied to every geolocation or every country. Of course, we've also seen great, development in terms of how banks understand gaming in countries such as Scandinavia, in Scandinavian countries, right? So, I can't obviously put this across, the whole globe, but it's something just to be very mindful about, in my opinion. We had seen those issues in the past. Again, right, it's all about a little bit your company stage, and banks can certainly be very helpful, but as a very first initial step, you have to obviously look at all the different variables with a little bit of caution. Now, the next point is something that can be executed much quicker, but it's related to banks, right? Which is when we come to talk about credit cards, right? Now, when it comes to credit cards, they can be quite useful in the sense of optimizing your cash flow. Simply because obviously when you think about, payout delays that certain platforms have, you can overcome those when you want to reinvest into marketing activities by using credit cards. Now, that's good, and it can make a lot of sense, especially if you want to scale your business, in the sense that, let's say, for example, you're an app-based game, you have ironSource as a partner. It takes ironSource 60 to 90 days to pay out your revenue. You're waiting for that. Using a credit card to upfront the UA budget that you basically require can help you a lot to move forward until you get the money back. Keeping in mind, it is, of course, something that requires a lot of diligence when it comes to cash flow management, right? In certain cases, obviously, when, again, performance goes down, you might end up with credit card debt, which will have a similar, similar effect on you and your credit rating as taking, for example, a loan from the bank, right? So in that sense, we have to be a little bit mindful about your own cash flow, which brings us to a very big topic that we're going to discuss quite a lot today, cash flow and how it's working. When we look at cash flow, obviously we want to make sure that, different than looking at your P&L, that, there's some sort of like a reserve, especially when you're dealing with credit cards and handling those. What we've seen too often is exactly that, fundamental changes. People are, saturated with a certain game, or this game is just like not growing at the same pace anymore. Something doesn't work in terms of like, UA. There can be tons of reasons why, for example, the income is not as high as a month before. Can be economic factors, for example. It's just something to be very mindful about. Continue now with the next one. And again, like if this goes too fast, or if there's certain questions, again, we're trying to keep it as general as possible because we have a global audience here today, and it could obviously mean different things to different countries. Then just please what that could mean specifically for you today. When it comes to the next one, this is an interesting one, and this is one I would like to talk a little bit more about, which is venture capital. Right, venture capital is something that I've seen at various events and when talking to studios a lot in the last years for two reasons. First one is a lot more companies are looking to raise Series A, seed funding rounds. Venture capital became like almost like a household term in the sense of what it is. People are quite used to, the idea of, bringing, getting money in exchange for equity. So it's something that becomes more and more established, right? What's interesting to see, and this gives obviously a great opportunity to a lot of games out there, is that there's not just general venture capital funds out there that are looking for AI or e-commerce or marketplaces or whatnot, but who are actually looking for game-specific investments, right? And there's more and more of those game-specific VCs popping all over the world, up from Asia to the US, which is fantastic. It gives the market, in my opinion, a very different level of credibility all of a sudden, because you have people who are trying to yield for very high returns who are suddenly interested in that market, which speaks for itself, right? So, I mean, this is just fantastic to see. Now, when we think about venture capital, obviously it has both. It has two sides of the coin as usual, right? And I'm trying to elaborate a little bit more on those today. And ideally, like if anyone here from a venture capital fund is listening in, I'd love to discuss this obviously and have a little bit of a conversation or with questions from any of the gaming audiences. When we think about venture capital now, we obviously have the flexibility that VC funds are investing in very different stages, right? So if you've never looked at VC funds before, then you will see that if you are at a very early stage, right, you can look for seed funding, or you look for what is called angel investors. So you're going to individuals who are usually quite wealthy, which is not the same as VC, but it's kind of the stage before that, to get you the first 5-digit budget or funding sorted before you go to a Series A. Right? Now, the Series A, in terms of volume and size, what it is actually is varies a little bit from country to country. In the US, usually ticket sizes, so like the first investment ticket that is done in a so-called series or in seed funding, or then a Series A in the second stage, can be in the millions already. Whereas in countries such as Germany, for example, where I would say the market is still a little bit more cautious in terms of how it's investing, and the country is obviously considerably smaller than the US as well. We're talking more about ticket sizes that are around the 6-digit, or in other Northern European or Central European countries, right? So just to keep in mind, really, we're talking about a very initial stage here when it comes to venture capital, where before even seed funding, the first kind of entrance point would be angel investors, which then mostly help you to open also doors into the whole venture capital space. It's a very small community, so obviously it's something to keep in mind what route you're going here. And it can be then used again and again to grow through different stages. Or if you already built a company that has 10 employees and has several titles launched, then venture capital can obviously be a very good way of scaling that further. Now, what's the downside? Well, the downside is quite obvious, because the downside is giving away ownership, right? But again, this is a little bit of a question that comes to at the end of the mindset. Like when I was building the agency that I'm just a board member of now, we also had a family office and a venture capital fund joining us there. Now, what happens when they join you is they not just give you money and are basically a silent shareholder. They are quite active in most of the cases, which can be good and which can be bad, right? So when it's a good scenario, then you have someone sitting as a board member, and when you have someone who sits on your board, they can give you advice. They can annoy you with KPI questions every Friday evening, but they can also obviously help you to maybe tailor your strategy in a certain direction that you haven't thought about. All of us, when we build a company or a game, we get a little bit of what we call office blindness, right? So we stop looking right and left that much, because we have that funnel vision on, and it's therefore good to get someone external on your board to kind of helps you to push in the same direction. I had a lot of those kind of sessions where I was really frustrated with having someone telling me what route to go, what to do, because it's my company. I want to be the one who decides what to do. And then someone all of a sudden tells me how they think they should do it. And they, might not have the upper hand depending on how many shares you give away. But at the end of the day, they're ROI driven, right? They want their money back. So they obviously are going to be very much focused on what gives them that opportunity rather than any emotions that any entrepreneur or founder might go through, right? So they really have that unbiased, hardcore vision on how the hell do I get my money back? And that can be good. But sometimes, obviously, emotion comes into places which can, become difficult situations. So on the downside here, with having someone else sitting, giving away a board seat, and not just a board seat, but also obviously the equity, is that you give away control. So you need to be obviously like in that position that you allow yourself, the venture that you're holding, the studio, or the just if it's just a game, that you're okay with someone else, like, giving you input on this. That doesn't have to happen in every case. Keep in mind, I'm trying to generalize as much as possible here today. There are probably VCs out there that are like more silent shareholders, but you have a lot of activism shareholders as well in this world, where people are trying to really take the steering wheel away from you and going in a different direction. So it's just something to keep in mind when you start having those kind of conversations. How actively involved are they, and how actively involved do I want them to be? In a lot of cases, obviously, that can come with a lot of benefits of certain market knowledge, industry experience, just like, a wealth of knowledge and seasoned professionals that you maybe haven't had yet, because, you're in your early 20s and it's the first venture you're building, and that's absolutely fine. So it's just something to keep in mind, that, you give a little bit of away control, but, the mentoring, the funding that comes inside of it is very important to mention. Now, maybe this is just as a quick side note, we are very well connected to a lot of gaming-specific VCs out there. So I'm more than happy if you have a specific case that makes sense to forward, to reach out after this to us as well, and we're more than happy to forward it to people. So we have agreements in place where we're more than happy to make those introductions if they're useful to them. So please use us for that. At the moment, I know One Up Capital could sound like a venture capital fund. We do not do equity investments, but can help more on the introductory side of it. We are going to launch a fund that is going to help with that kind of sort of investments later on, but it is not operational as of yet. Let me just drink something very quickly. And if any questions, guys, then please tell me. Happy to have a conversation here rather than just a dialogue, a monologue here. So happy to have a dialogue rather than a monologue. Coming to the next one, and one that is obviously also important to us, which we see growing in areas such as the US, in Europe, and in areas such as Russia, is user acquisition funding. Now, some of you might have had conversations with user acquisition funds here before. Some of them out there, besides obviously One Up Capital, are Pollen VC or Bravo, to just name a few. There's not many out there yet if you compare it to the number of VC funds or banks or crowdfunding platforms, for example. So it's something that occurred in the last 2 years, and is very steadily on the rise right now. But it's a very interesting field, and I wanted to take the time, obviously, to explain it as well. I don't want to pitch too much about capital here today. I rather want to explain to you the concept of UA funding and how it works across the companies that provide it, right? So that you have a little bit of an alternative to the other three that we've mentioned earlier. Now, with user acquisition funding, it's kind of what the word says, right? It gives you the ability to finance and fund operations and growth activities that will help you to acquire new users. Now, the definition that we basically put down for that is we call that growth activities through receivable-backed payouts. Now, receivable-backed payouts is kind of the key term here, when we start discussing all of this. Now, we have two different investment phases with a lot of those UA funds out there, especially with us at One Up Capital. Now, the very first investment phase is about cash flow optimization, right? So you have, just to exemplify everything now, I will take a mobile app or a mobile game to just exemplify everything a little bit. You have, for example, in the month of February now, made $5,000 in revenues. Those revenues come across different sources. They come across, I don't know, Apple, Google, if it's it's mobile, they come through Iron Source. Depending on what platform you're using to monetize your game, you have different payout terms of those platforms, right? So in the example, in the worst case example now of Iron Source, it can take up to 90 days, so almost 3 months, until you get money in certain cases. On other platforms, it can go much quicker. The same applies, of course, if you talk console or PC-based games on Epic or Steam, right? Now, the issue with this is if you earn $5,000 in February, but you have to wait until April or May or June until you actually receive that money, you sit around and can't make any further payments. Now, we are talking obviously about UA right now because that's something we want to grow here, and why that all makes sense, I'll get to in a bit. But like there's obviously several payments that you might have to make, but the key one that we'd want to talk about is reinvesting it into growth. Now, if the money is not paid out, even if you just reinvest 70% of the 5,000 that we're talking about right now, you still don't have it. So you can't really, go any further. Now you can go and think about like different financing options, of course. We mentioned credit cards, you can use those, but then again, you have to pay that money back after a certain time, so that it can be tricky, the time window as well. So what we are doing here effectively is we help you to factorize those receivables that you have, right? So user acquisition funds will pay out the money that you've earned immediately, depending on the supplier or the company that does it. Can be 24 hours, can be 2 days, can be 3 days, depending on the due diligence and other factors. For us, it's usually within 2 working days that you would have the funds in your account. Now, you now have that money to put that back into marketing, into user acquisition, especially. That way, you can accelerate the growth rate that you have. Because if you think about a curve, and every time you earn money, let's say after February now, it pauses because you can't reinvest. You only have the organic growth. You don't really grow. You just decline. So in order to accumulate faster that growth, what we want to do is accelerate those payouts. So we want to make sure that on a weekly basis or monthly basis, as every time basically receivables coming in and money is being made, that you don't have to wait a very long time to be paid out. It can be paid out much quicker, which essentially is the first stage. The second stage goes a bit beyond that. In the second stage, we look further than that. And for that, you need a little bit of data. I know that there's maybe 1 or 2 UA funds out there that do it the same way as we do. I obviously can mostly talk only for us, but I think it's a bit similar to the others, but I can't sign that one. Which is going in the second phase is paying out money beyond the receivables that you have. Now, let's stick with the example of February. You earned $5,000 across Iron Source and Google, and we pay that out immediately. That's good. You can reinvest that. Now, however, you want to grow more than that, right? So what we would do and what we would look into is, as soon as we have statistical relevant data, which usually takes like up to 3 months at the most, we can try to project future cash flow earnings. So we can look into, what if we not just pay you $5,000 today, what if we pay you $10,000? How would that affect your user acquisition? Would we still look at similar cost per acquisition, cost per install, lifetime value, whatnot, whatever you're looking at, right? Monetization factors and so on. Or would those numbers plateau, or would they go down? If the answer is they would actually benefit from that and we all can make even more money, then it's a win-win situation. Then it's a no-brainer. Then we can obviously say, all right, instead of giving you those 5,000 today, we can also give you those 10,000 and help you to grow much, much quicker and with a faster rate. It accelerates everything. And nowadays, it's about acceleration, about being fast. I mean, think about the ocean of competitive games and apps that are out there. How to really stand out of that. You have so many markets that now, for example, have such easy accessibility to, building apps with so much talent and so on, that we need to come up with ways to say, okay, how can I take the knowledge that I have, the talent that I have, and build something that I can show to the world that doesn't just drown in this ocean. And that's exactly why financing is such a key part. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to think about financing and marketing once the game is out there. And those are the 2 key things. And either, just to sum it up now a little bit, is You go to the publisher and say, look, I'm a developer at heart. That's all I do. I don't want to be bothered by anything else. Good. That's the route. Pursue it. If you say, no, I want to aim for building a studio, I have an entrepreneurial mindset, I want to learn finance and marketing and advertising, then it's probably the other route. And then those different topics to start making sense to think about, right? Now, just to sum up, just to wrap up the user acquisition funding side now, and then we will want to draw like a little bit of a line here and like, look at the pros and cons again and to summarize and hopefully also come up with some sort of like, a solution moving forward, ideally. Is it gives you a good ability to grow quite quickly, and other than using a loan, for example, from a bank or from a credit card, should the game's performance in future months suffer for whatever reason, and you can't pay back the entire amount that basically was paid out, then it's being adjusted to the percentage of revenue. It's being adjusted with a percentage of towards the revenue that you're earning. So in that sense, you wouldn't go into a debt scenario, which is quite important to understand, that using user acquisition funding is not the same as debt. It's an alternative way of advanced payouts, but it's not put as debt in also in books, which is something to just keep in mind. Now, looking back at what I've discussed, and I haven't got any questions so far. So I don't know if it's good or if it's a bad thing, but please, if anything is like unclear, or you would like to learn a little bit more about this, feel free to reach out either through the chat here. Please let me know. Oh, sorry, I'm just seeing actually there is a few questions coming up.
Yeah, I'll pop some questions up. You want me to read them and then you can answer them?
I was on the private chat and I didn't see them, and now I'm seeing them in the comment section. So let's go ahead.
What I can do is I'll just pop them up in chat, and then you can answer them here. We have from Mage Loop on YouTube. What are the most important considerations do you make at OneUp Capital before making an investment decision? Is there any geographical limitations?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. There are some geographical limitations. At the moment, it depends on the different UA funds out there. Because again, as I mentioned, there's one UA fund, I think that's based in Russia, that is really more for like the Asian markets. We are only focused on US and European based companies. So the company has to be based in US or in Europe. That's the only geographical limitation. When it comes to investment decisions, some UA funds out there have a entrance barrier. They, for example, say you need to have at least $20,000 in revenue that we can pay out as an advance before it makes sense to them. For us, we don't have that limitation. So for us, it has to, theoretically it can be $1, but what's more important than being $1 is it has to be statistically relevant. Because at the end of the day, we're putting our finance and statistics hat on, and we're just trying to crunch the numbers and see how can we basically give you more money in the next couple of weeks, right? And if we only have a very little amount of UA that has been tested before with like $1 in revenue, for example, that it gave us a return, we can't make the decision. So it has to be statistically relevant, but it can be like as little as a couple of grand. I hope that answers the question, Mage Loop. Shall I just look into the next question that was here? Is it absolutely necessary to start a company to fund a game? Yeah, Cauldron, that's also a very good question. In my opinion, yes, it is, because the thing is, well, it depends on your mindset again, right? Sorry, I'm just like, I just had to rethink this for a second. You can obviously, as an individual, start a game and take the earnings from that, as kind of like similar as you would operate as a freelancer, right? You don't necessarily have to have a company for that. But now here comes the thing. When you build a game, what you're doing essentially is building IP. And an IP is an asset. And an asset needs to be structured in a certain way. Now, a way to structure an asset is to, for example, put it into a company. You can become, I'll give you an example. If you earn money every month, right, you can become rich through that money. But one thing that you will not get is wealthy. In order to build wealth, you need to have assets. right? That can be real estate, that can be anything. So there's a difference between, getting rich through monthly income and building up wealth. Now, and that's maybe answering your question, like it's kind of the mindset, if you want to create some certain amount of wealth and you want to build an IP and you want to build an asset through that you can sell maybe even in the future, then you should start a company, definitely. I hope that gives a little bit of an answer to that. What percentage of games that you deal with receive funding? That's a good question. I've actually never looked up a percentage rate in that, but as long as you fulfill the criteria of being based in the US or in Europe, you have a revenue stream of like at least 2 to 3 months that shows a little bit of growth. Doesn't have to be 100,000. It can be like a smaller 4-digit amount. Then the likelihood is very high that you will receive that stage 1 financing. And the second stage financing, we've probably seen that like around 70% of the companies we go through the first stage with receive the additional second stage funding as well. If it's a private figure, what's the industry standard? I wouldn't know what's the industry standard, to be very honest, but thank you for the question. But it doesn't make sense to make something up here if I also don't know it. All right, then we have Guardian of Language. My impression is that venture capital investors aren't interested in early stage games, whereas angel investors don't see that as an obstacle. What's your opinion? Thanks for the question. It's a very interesting one. Now, what we have to understand is venture capital traditionally invests into companies, not products, right? Now, the thing is, what the game effectively could be described as is potentially a product, right? So you are looking for someone who not just like gives you money for a specific game, but gives you money for a specific company. And this is where early stage can become tricky. Because the way, and I'm speaking just for the VCs that I've met over the last decade and so on, when you invest in the early stage companies that has only one title out there, that's a very high risk investment, right? Because you don't know yet, is the title going to work out or is it not going to work out? Publishers or UA funds work a little bit differently because we are looking at like a more UA perspective of it and so on. VCs are starting to pick that up as well, but obviously that makes it a bit more difficult for VCs to access the early stage because they want to invest into a company that they can build out, and the game potentially has a little bit of a risk factor, right? An angel investor starts at a very lower entrance barrier, right? An angel investor starts at 4 to 5 digit figure in order to get there. And angel investors often is a recommendation that comes through, like your own network or something like that. People who have a little bit of play money that can, make 20 smaller investments and 2 of them are actually picking up to become very successful, which is then fine for them. They have a different risk approach in that sense as well. So it's again a little bit about being mindful about, it's not just, if you go to a VC, it's not just a game you're pitching a company. Mage Loop, you're welcome. Cauldron, you're welcome too. I think that summarizes all the questions now. Yeah, guys, maybe to just come to an end here and to sum up everything a little bit. I mean, please, now I see your questions. My apologies for that. Just feel free to, message anything interesting. Yeah, see if there's anything else. Oh, there we got one. Bold Spirit Game Studio. Are investors usually interested in long-term projects like games that are estimated to take around 3 to 4 years to make, or is that too long? Thank you. Interesting question. Now, when it comes to investors, it probably depends a little bit on what type of investors you mean. I would assume you're talking about venture capital here, but otherwise just send me like a comment if you mean different types of investment. But 3 to 4 years is a very long period, right? Because at the end of the day, the way investment funds work is like this. You have a venture capital fund that raises money themselves. They don't naturally, they have a little bit of money that the partners bring in. Historically, a venture capital fund has a guy that built its own company, sold it, has a couple of million, says, great, what do I do with that money? Real estate is boring. I build a VC fund. I go to other guys, get them as partners on board, build LPs, build a fund. That's good. Now, the reason why I'm telling this is kind of like to explain your question. Now, those funds raise money on a mostly annual cycle, right? So they're trying to exit games after a certain while. And if the development time is too long, then that could be an unattractive investment for them. I'm not speaking again for everyone here. And when we talk about VC, I have to generalize a little bit more because there's too little data and information about just gaming venture capital funds, because there's just a handful out there. So we just have to keep in mind that the direction, that there could be a bit impatience. Now, with angel investors, that might be different, because with angel investors, they have a very different agenda in terms of they don't raise rounds and they don't have to report back to shareholders like a VC does with LPs, right? They have their own money. So in that sense, that could potentially be possible. It is a different approach for angels than for them. Yeah. So thanks, Bold Spirit Game Studios, for adding that in the comments. Then the next one, sorry, I want to go on this. Divinorium, I hope I pronounced that right. How far in development you think investors would start looking into the project in a lighter light? Yeah. Now, when it comes to, I can talk, I think the best way about UA funds. UA funds are only looking at projects that have been developed, that are launched, that are live. When it comes to investors and VCs, especially if there's a little bit of track record, then it's slightly different. You can have a demo, playable first version, or anything that helps you to get the message across. But guys, keep one thing in mind, right? Visuals and everything is good, but when we as a company, I'm not talking OneUp Capital, the company before that, when we pitch to venture capital funds, those are number guys, right? They want to crunch the numbers. They want to see what users could make, they want to see a monetization approach, and so on and so on. So even if you're not fully developed yet, have a proper stack of financials ready to blow their minds with. That will help you tremendously, because that's obviously their mindset and what guides them in order to make reasonable decisions. At the end of the day, they again have other shareholders that they need to provide a reasonable return on investment. Not every investment has to work out. I mean, VCs know that. It's usually like 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, but you don't want to be one of those. So in that sense, have something prepared. All right, I hope that helps. Otherwise, if it's not clear, the answer or anything, please just feel free to pop in another question.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions. So what kind of jargon should people know, like term sheets, right? Term sheets basically means an offer, right? When an investor gives an offer. So what other kind of jargon and things like that should people know when they're looking for an investor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you brought up one that you really want to hear, which is term sheet. When you hear the term sheet, that an offer is basically an initial offer, at least a proposal is being made. So term sheet is very similar to that. It kind of like lays out everything that potentially can happen. It's not a binding offer in any way, right? So it's very important to keep that in mind. It's more like an initial proposal in terms of, you give us 10% of your company in exchange for $100,000, right? The next one that is kind of related to that, in order to just blur out some terms here, is cap table, right? Now, the cap table, and that's something investors are very interested in learning more about, is how many people are actually involved, So your cap table could be completely scattered, which is not always a good thing. Scattered in the sense of, you have your mom, your uncle, your brother, your neighbor, 10,000 other people that you've raised money from, 100 euros there, 1,000 there, 10,000 there, that are all somehow shareholders. Clean that up, because investors don't like to have a shared position with too many other people that they have to sit on a board table, So ideally, you can bundle them, for example. So the smartest way, if you already have a cap table that consists out of 10 family members and friends and family and whatnot, then bundle them into a company that they all are invested in, so that investors don't have to deal with it. Best advice in terms of cap tables.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. So talking about term sheets, I got a couple questions about them. Like, what percentage of your meetings lead to term sheets, and then what percentage of your term sheets actually turn into actual deals?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we have to consider that when let's talk about the first stage, right? When how many of the meetings turn into term sheets? If they fulfill the investment criteria, right, then it's around half of them, right? If they fulfill the investment criteria, which you will have summarized in the presentation that you will get as well. We're talking geolocations, a month available on the market, data available, and I think those are the two key ones really that we're looking at, right? When it comes to term sheets that are actually turning into deals, it's two-sided, right? Because we're not making that decision by ourselves. It's also you guys that are making that decision. You also need to be happy with the terms that you're presenting. At the end of the day, and this is maybe like, when we think about in the last minutes about a conclusion here, the bad news, right? The bad news is everything comes with an opportunity cost, right? It doesn't matter what you do, you will have to face it somehow. You just have to look at the lesser evil here, right? So in the sense of like, a bank loan, it's the opportunity cost is obviously the interest and the way you have to pay it back. When you talk about, even us, the user acquisition fund, you have a certain fee that you need to pay. When it comes to venture capital, you take away ownership, or even a publisher, you give away ownership in an IP for something. The thing is, you have to ask yourself, like, is it worth that, opportunity cost? And that's something we can try to pursue you on, and convince you. But at the end of the day, you have to make the decision. So I would say of everyone, to answer your question, Dan, of everyone who actually has a term sheet, it's around like 60 to 70%. I don't have an exact number, but just like, roundabout that actually, goes to the next stage. One thing to keep in mind is just the last thing, they can be complementary, right? Like we have a lot of cases where we work with games that we work together with venture capital on just to give additional boost, right? Just one thing doesn't exclude the other one, right? If you obviously are like completely crowded in a lot of bank debt and then want to raise venture capital money to pay that back, that's not going to work out. But others are very complementary here as well.
Oh, that's really good info. So do you, I'm sure a lot of people will like study how to do a pitch, to investors. So do you often get developers maybe that you've turned down? Do they like ask you, what could we do better in our pitch? Or do you give that kind of advice as well? Or?
Yes, I'm happy to share a little bit of advice in terms of pitching. I've done a fair amount of that myself, and when I was a little bit younger and I was building a company. It was more the ad tech marketing space, but the principles are still the same, really. And obviously, we are receiving a lot of them nowadays, and you look at this with a different light. So I think key thing is keeping it short and snappy, right? Think about it like handing in a CV, right? If you have a CV that goes over 3 pages, no one has time to read that. Most people don't really read your, cover letter. No one gives a shit about cover letters, right? So what you need to keep in mind is you're not the only one sending it. Keep it really short and snappy. Have, cover page, end page is fine, and then maybe 6 to 8 pages in between. Keep it maximum 10 pages, right? It has to not have too much written text and content on it. When you want to get this in front of like a managing partner or director, not always like an analyst, you want to push for the next one in the decision-making role, right? And those people, they go home at 6 p.m. They don't work always all-nighters, and they don't have that time to go through everything. They have 2 kids and a divorced wife that need to manage at the same time, maybe. So, point is, keep it short and snappy is probably the first good advice. Second one is numbers, right? Now, with gaming, it's about visuals. It's about being bold and beautiful. I love it. I'm a gamer myself. That's why, we're all here. We love the art. We love the feeling for visual. But the thing is, it only gets you that far. It gets you maybe, to raise an eyebrow and to help you to a certain stage. Know your numbers. That's key. It's the same thing as in school. We all like to have art class or whatever, or the things that interest us. And when it comes to oh no, now I have to go math, maybe it's not the most exciting thing, but at the end of the day, that's what gets you the money, right? So making sure that you know those numbers inside out and actually make sense out of them on one of those pages, just have a table that kind of maps out exactly how you want to grow, helps you, right? So, I think that is something that we have to just keep in mind, that that's what at the end a lot of them look at, and it's I don't want to be the one who gives cold-hearted truths here, but at the end of the day, unfortunately, a game doesn't have to always look good to make money, and that's not something that I really like to praise here at all. But when you are able to produce a beautiful game, and on top of that, you can also do good numbers, well, you're gonna get there.
Exactly. All right, we've got time for one more question, and here's the big one, I guess. So after everyone's agreed and everyone's okay, we're going to do it, and the developers have agreed and you guys agree, how long does it typically take to close it?
Okay.
free to close.
Yeah, it depends if you look at the user acquisition side, funding side, or if you look at the venture capital side of things. For the user acquisition funding side, the process is extremely quick. So due diligence it's almost instant. We work in two different ways. Either we use an API integration, so we give you an API key, and that reads our financial data, and we're good to go basically. And then we make the transaction. The whole process takes maybe 24 hours, right, until you have the money on the bank account. So that's short and snappy after everything's agreed on, right? When it comes to the capital, so the equity side of things and so on, we were talking about like less than a month here. We're talking about maybe 1 or 2 weeks. It's not taking ages, because obviously once everything is agreed, from a cash perspective, especially if you have clear, determined goals and objectives that you need to fulfill, or even milestones and goals, then no one is going to hold that back, because the people that actually you are pitching for, they have that money. Otherwise, it would be ridiculous and would make sense. So that is going to be paid out quite quickly. Again, with UA funds, in our case, it takes, once everything is agreed, 24 hours until it's transferred.
Yeah, so that's quick. That's like bam.
That's technology. Yeah, that's good. And I mean, even transactions from Europe to the US, we're not talking 3 working days anymore, guys. I mean, that's ridiculous if anyone tells you that it takes that long. Yeah, time is money. You're absolutely right.
Oh, time is money. Okay, so here's something, because we have a couple more minutes. We have a couple more minutes. If you've got a couple more minutes, how often does something you make or something you invest in and it fails? What's that kind of? Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's a very good question. So there's 2 things again on it, and I always need to differentiate here between the type of investing. I'm now only speaking about VC and UA funding. Now for UA funding, it's actually not so critical, because for the first investment stage, we are only financing money that is already being made. It's just not paid out to you yet, so it's in advance. So we're going to receive it at some point. The only risk is if, for example, Google, Apple goes bankrupt, or refuses to pay out, but that would like duck up the entire industry. So that would be really bad. But when actually it comes to the second payout phase, and we give you money beyond those receivables, and you don't earn that money. So let's, for example, say we give you 10 grand, but you only made 8 grand. Now those 2 grand that have a delta, we can quite easily take care of that by agreeing mutually on a percentage of future revenue. Let's say, for example, 5% every month that you would give away, that you can afford to actually pay that back, right? And that's really different to using a bank that says every month this is what you have to pay back, and if you can't, it's a really bad situation. So in that sense, it gives you a bit of flexibility. Now for venture capital, it's a bit more critical, because obviously if an investment fails, and what you define as a failed investment, a company that can't be sold, is not really a failed investment per se, right? It's just like, maybe something that doesn't really like go the way you've planned it. A company only really fails if it goes bankrupt, or if funds completely run out and no revenue is being made, and that happens obviously, and that's a situation that is the opportunity cost of the venture capital funds, right? So also they have to think about their opportunity cost and what the downside here is. In a lot of cases that we've seen and we've worked with, money can be put after behind the company again if it runs out of funds, right? It depends a little bit on the individual situation. It doesn't mean just because you ran out of that money that everything has to be closed down, right? It depends on a lot of situations. So for example, in Europe, we have, through the Corona crisis, a lot of governments set up aid funds, right? Interestingly, a lot of startups haven't used those. Why? Because their venture capital funds have given them money to survive that period, right? So it depends a little bit on the situation that we are in. But I found that when I read that like 2 days ago, actually quite interesting. If they completely fail and they go bankrupt, then that's the risk the venture capital funds has to carry, right? That's obviously something that they have to keep in mind, and they're mindful about, or they're aware of the idea that their way of investing is a very high risk approach, but that can also yield to a very great return.
Okay, that's interesting. So here's another good question that just popped up. What do you value most in a company that you're investing in?
I have to think carefully about this one, right? It depends on the stage, but when we look at the user acquisition financing side, it's simply put growth, right? We all we want to do is take the existing growth, as little as it might be, but if there's a little bit of it, then we want to take it and we want to uplift it. We want to boost it, right? If we can see that there's statistical relevance behind that growth, then we can take those numbers and we can actually make something big out of it. That's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at the potential of growing something. When it comes to venture capital, of course, you would do the same thing, of course, with a fund like this. But at the end of the day, it has a little bit more factors, right? If you, for example, come up with a game that has a way of making people playing it that has never been done before, that is basically something that's completely new to the industry, you might even find people that are a little bit more risk taking here to invest into something like this, because it can change an industry, right? So those things can be looked at, but at the end of the day, it's probably growth once the game's developed. And again, don't hate me for saying this, but you are in this difficult position between this game is just visually stunning. It is just something that has been, developed with so much heart and passion. But you have to look at the numbers, unfortunately, as well. So it is always a two-sided thing that is a conversation that we often have, unfortunately. But we want to find solutions that can make not just like a free-to-play hyper casual game like always a success, but also the more beautiful games relevant.
So basically what you're saying is you're a dream smasher, right? Smash people's dreams? No, not at all. Okay, let's see.
Just produce hyper casual games, guys. No, I'm just kidding, right? I mean, it's really just about about how you present something at the end of the day as well, right? As I said, what is the advice you give when you present such a deck? Of course, present your game in the best light possible, but don't forget about the numbers, because the people who are looking at this, they're very numbers driven. They might be gamers, they might not be gamers, but that doesn't really matter that much. Right. It's about financing here, and the talk is about financing, right? So it's just something that keep in mind. Don't hate me for it, please. I'm just trying to give good advice.
Dream smasher. No, it's fine. Sometimes that kind of people need to get real truth sometimes, and it is what it is, right? Game could look amazing, but if the numbers don't add up, here we go. Guardian Language has a little comment here. Finding angel investors is hard because they don't tend to advertise themselves. Do you know of any angel networks?
Yes, I actually do have that. I will, Dan, can I have a public library of angel investors, which is an Excel spreadsheet, which is a Google shared spreadsheet, which is publicly available. I can add that link to the presentation that Dan will send around. Dan, if you allow me to send you a second version of it, then I can look that up, add that to the presentation, and give that for everyone. I think a lot of people would appreciate that, probably.
Yeah, you could do that. You could even pop it in the chat right here, too, if you'd like.
I honestly, it's somewhere in my files. I would have to look it up now. I don't have it at hand like this, unfortunately. But I can add it to the presentation. When are you sending that around?
Oh, when we're sending out information? I think after the whole conference is done.
Okay, but
then we'll be sending stuff out. No, we're going to send it out right away, right when this is over. No, anyone else have any questions here? I know you guys have questions, because I know that you developers are like, but we want money. How do I get it? Right? So pop some questions in the chat.
Send me an email. Talk about it.
Okay. Mark Christian Calogay says, yeah, I'll also appreciate that.
Yeah,
actually, I just here we go. Let's see. One more. We can do one more question here from Div. Got in the middle of the presentation, so you might have already said something like that. But do you have a file example of a good pitch deck, doc, etc., that you can share? Maybe you could share that if you have something like that. We can put it in the afterwards, after the conference is over, when we send out everything. And remember, you guys, to make sure that you get the presentations from all the speakers, I'll put the link right there. So all ticket holders, you just have to get your passes from indiegame.business. And if you don't have your pass, then you won't get your info. So make sure and do it.
Well, I
want to answer this one more. What's your favorite game at the moment? What are you playing?
Okay, I'm actually playing Doom Eternal. I know I'm very late to the game, but big fan. I have 2 children now, so I'm everything takes me ages to play. And I picked up what was it, Borderlands 3, which took me like a year to get close. And yeah, then it was.
You know what I'm playing right now is Neon Abyss. It's an amazing game. I love it. It was
Just
one of my favorite games from last year.
Yeah, well, it's
all right.
Guys,
we're gonna have to get out of here. We have our next talk here. Where are we at on our list? M&A and investments landscape in 2021.
Guys, thanks
so
so much.
Here we go. Thank you so much, Max. I appreciate you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.